Another memorable run for men's basketball. Oh, and you're going to get to see me take not one, but 2 pies to the face next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. It's caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison. Brady gets terrific.
Throws it, get it, touchdown, Knight again.
Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson. Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Colliger at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good. He's 5'7", 179 pounds. A junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris hacks a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Second. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again.
Go Blue, I'm Steve Deace. Welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast, wherein you will see me take not one, but 2 pies to the face in remembrance of perhaps the weakest take, the dumbest take I've ever had. And let me tell you, if you followed my career, that'd be saying. But first, the really good news. Yet another memorable run for the Michigan Wolverines all the way. 4 games in 4 days to the Big Ten Championship.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Madison Square Garden. Oh, big 3, Duncan Robinson.
And the Wolverines are going to survive the Iowa Hawkeyes at the Big Ten tournament. Michigan Wolverines, the 5 seed. Back-to-back wins the first 2 days.
Robinson drives into the paint. He's shot from behind him. This still gets the basket. Michigan wins it by 11. It will advance to the final. Pretty impressive. Back-to-back Big Ten championships for Beilein and the Wolverines.
And there it is again. Michigan does it a second year in a row. 4 games in 4 days. And it's the second year in a row as well that in the last 3 games, Michigan played the highest seed it could have possibly played both times. Average margin of victory in Michigan's last 3 games, 2 of them against consensus top 10 teams, and Michigan State and Purdue, 14 points per game was Michigan's margin of victory in those 3 games, and the Wolverines were dominant after they were pushed to the brink in the opening round by a game Iowa squad. I clearly think Michigan is a team that's poised to make a lot of noise in the NCAA tournament because we're talking about one of the best defensive teams in the country, the best defensive team in John Beilein's tenure at Michigan. They're 6th in the nation in defensive efficiency. But then you also throw in how multifaceted Michigan is offensively, the ability in their entire 9-man rotation, there's always 3 guys on the floor that can create their own offense, which makes Michigan a very difficult guard. So when you are a tenacious defensive team on one end, and then you're a difficult team to guard on the other end offensively, you're going to be a very tough out. And we saw that in the Big Ten tournament, and I think we're going to see it in the NCAA tournament as well. Coming up later on in this episode, in fact, I'm going to give you my bracketology preview. I do this 2 weeks before Selection Sunday every year. It's my only bracketology every year, and I do it 2 weeks before because that's before any of the conference tournament games are played. I want to show that what guys like Joe Lunardi get celebrated for doing every year really isn't that hard. So I'll show you what I projected last week would be the upcoming NCAA tournament brackets when they're unveiled next week. But I want to stop for a second and also just give a big picture view of where I think the basketball program is at here at Michigan. You know, growing up, Michigan basketball, I became a Michigan fan when we moved to Grand Rapids when I was 10 years old, and I fell in love with Steve Smith and Rick Rogers and that first team in '83 that went 9-2 and got to the Sugar Bowl against Auburn, and I was hooked after that. And that Michigan basketball team that year, that was Tim McCormick, and they won the NIT. And then the next 2 years, Michigan dominated the Big Ten Conference, winning back-to-back undisputed regular season Big Ten championships. And that's the era of Michigan basketball that I was used to. Roy Tarpley, Butch Wade, Richard Relford, the General, Gary Grant, Antoine Jobert, then Glenn Rice, Mark Hughes, Loy Vaught, Sean Higgins, and those teams, Ramil Robinson winning the 1989 national championship. And then you go to the Fab Five, who needs no introduction other than just to say Fab Five: Weber, Rose, Howard, King, Jackson. And then even the teams after that, with, you know, Gerard Ward was a National Player of the Year in high school. Maurice Taylor, Lewis Bullock, those teams that won the very first Big Ten tournament championship in 1998. That's the era of Michigan basketball that I grew up on. And then on a wintry road one night, Robert Tractor Trailer had his SUV spin out with a young recruit named Mateen Cleaves on his official visit. And here's this kid from modest means driving a tricked-out SUV that prompted a lot of questions. And we got introduced to the name Ed Martin. And even though that Michigan team would go on and win the first Big Ten tournament that March, what proceeded shortly thereafter, you know, Michigan was a 3 seed, lost to 6-seeded UCLA in the second round. And from there began really a nuclear winter for Michigan basketball, a decade without the NCAA tournament. Enter John Beilein, who had taken West Virginia to new heights. And what we've seen, 2012, John Beilein won Michigan's first regular season Big Ten basketball championship, share of it since '86. 2013, he took us to the brink of a national championship. And if you want to say, because Louisville cheated to beat us, that we were the rightful champion, I ain't going to argue with you. 2014, that team came back, dominated the Big Ten regular season to win undisputed the Big Ten championship. 2017, Big Ten tournament champion, Sweet 16. Now 2018, Big Ten tournament champion again, a 28-win regular season, one of the most successful regular seasons Michigan's had before we even get to the NCAA tournament. And if you go back to that nuclear winter with Michigan basketball, you know, the Michigan administration, with our proud academic reputation, the basketball tradition, we looked at a program like Duke and we thought, you know, why can't we do what Mike Krzyzewski's doing? Demographically diverse teams, smart teams. We aren't playing the agent recruiting game that other schools are playing, and mostly built with 3- and 4-year players. And look what they've become. Even taking guys out of our own backyard like Shane Battier, who went to the same high school as Chris Webber. It seems like we have finally reached that pinnacle, especially because, you know, Duke's not that program anymore. Mike Krzyzewski's in the one-and-done game. They're a transient program. Most of their roster turns over on an annual basis. In many respects, what Michigan has become over the last year plus is Michigan has become the program that Duke used to be. Smart kids. And, you know, I can't stand our stereotypes in sports. Go back and watch how articulate Rose and Weber and Howard, you know, everybody acted like, you know, the Fab Five with the shaved heads and the baggy shorts. They were kind of the thugs, and Duke was the clean-cut program. Go back and watch those Duke teams with Christian Laettner and Bobby Hurley. They talked as much junk as anybody did, the Fab Five included. Nobody in the NBA talked more smack than the hick from French Lick, but, you know, we love our stereotypes, so it is what it is. But in many respects, under John Beilein now, Michigan has become the program Duke used to be. Demographically diverse, smart, skilled, but nasty. I mean, look at John Teskey posterizing Isaac Haas. Look at Mo Wagner with that cocky smile. You know what that reminds you of? You know who else had that kind of cocky smile? Christian Laettner had that cocky smile. Heck, it was serendipity for Grant Hill, the former Duke star, to be calling our run again this year. He even compared Xavier Simpson and his tenacious on-the-ball defense to his former teammate, Bobby Hurley. Regardless of what Mo Wagner decides to do, whether he decides to go and stay pro this time or not, with the recruits we have coming in, we are poised for, I think, a special era of Michigan basketball. Heck, I just told you what's gone down since 2012. We're already in a special era of Michigan basketball. And when you look at the way John Beilein is doing it, above board, not getting into the seedy underbelly of college basketball, that's the way Coach K used to do it as well. So we wanted to be the next Duke for so many years. That's what the administration at Michigan wanted to be. Well, we're not the next Duke. We kind of are now what Duke used to be.
Andy Katz here for the Big Ten Network, joined by Michigan head coach John Beilein. And John, it seems like I can start saying this almost every March, you guys continue to get better and better. Why is that?
I don't know. I think that first of all, you got really good high character kids who understand there's a process you go through the season. And it's one with ebbs and flows, and you just got to stay persistent at trying to get better. Andy, I think you've been to some of our practices. I hope our practices reflect of, yes, we're getting ready for the next game, but just as importantly, we're trying to get better every game, or individually. Our individual skills will get better. That way we can dribble better with our eyes. I mean, just really simple, dribble more with our eyes up so we can see people. Practice getting your jump shot off quicker. All those things we just emphasize all year long. Got a great staff, Andy. Got a great staff.
You know, Duncan Robinson told me that you prepare these teams, and I've heard this before, but it was interesting to hear from him, as well as anyone, you know, that you're going to take away maybe what they do well. How much detail do you spend, especially in a tournament like this where it's back to back to back to back, even though they're teams you're familiar with, to not almost overload the players, but make sure they feel comfortable?
Well, what I do is try and put it into a time frame. All right, we got 1 hour here today. We're going to watch, like this morning, we're going to do 15 minutes of video. We're going to do 20 minutes of defensive walkthrough and 20 minutes off. When that timer's on, it's over. So it limits the detail. You could talk about everything, you know, you could talk about everything. So you try to limit your time. You know, Muhammad Ali's sitting there like he has heard it all. He knows exactly what I'm saying, but he sits there and listens. Where some of the freshmen, you know, I got to wake them up a little bit when they think it may not be important. But there's some detail involved, and I think there is at any time that you really want to be good. You just can't say, hey, just go play. That's not really how it works. And I think it really prepares these kids for the NBA when they're just not playing. There's a lot of detail in what they do.
Why has this team become even a more efficient defensive team?
I think a bunch of things. Our coaching staff over these years has grown to really press on with me how, not that we didn't think defense was important, but you remember, we were really good defensively with the 1-3-1 zone at West Virginia. That was really our calling card a little bit. As it went on, we stopped playing it because we like to win, and it wasn't working. And so over this time, we have gotten better and better at ball screen defense and doing things and not switching as much. And you got to go back to Bakari Alexander, Val Jordan, Jeff Meyer, and then now when we come forward now with Luke and Billy Donlin and DeAndre Haynes and Sadi, all these guys have really done a great job of when I give them a station, they work their tail off and they just get better.
What I love about watching your team is they look like they're having a great time. So how do you balance the demands that you have on them and also making sure that they're enjoying this, that this is sort of the time of their lives.
It is hard because I'm like that guy that is always, on to the next game, man. Don't celebrate. The other shoe's going to drop. And here's what they have is they are so connected off the court. And there's just this chemistry between them all that we generally have had. We really have had over years. This is just another example. Recruit the right kids. Get kids that really want to develop, right, over time, and that are going to be high-character kids who understand, you get it, we say, understand it. They understand there's a process to playing at a high level. And then it sort of all works.
If you, and I did this while that clip was playing, if you close your eyes and you don't look at the fact that that's John Beilein talking, the language he uses, the process, development, high-character kids, it's supposed to be a game. The deference to his assistants. That's what Coach K used to sound like. Remember, even at the biggest stage of the NCAA tournament, assistants like Steve Wojciechowski or Quinn Snyder or Johnny Dawkins, they would be the ones that would do the interviews, giving them a chance in the spotlight. It's really eerie. It's really eerie. It's like Duke has said, you know what? We're just going to do what John Calipari and Rick Pitino were doing now. You guys, somebody else can have this brand. And it's like Michigan and John Beilein came along and said, you know what? We will gladly take it. Back here on Michigan Podcast, and there's a look at our Patreon page. And if you stop right there for just a second, you'll notice that while we were off last week, I put together a podcast, 4 weeks till Selection Sunday, where Michigan basketball stands. And that kind of was able to tide you over while we took a 1 week hiatus since signing day. And if you're one of the folks that is supporting us on Patreon, you got to take advantage of that. You got to listen to that. And we greatly appreciate your support. I know a lot of you ask us, hey, what can we do to get more content from you guys? Well, keep in mind, we are taking time away from the stuff that actually feeds our families to put this together as a labor of love every single week. And so if there is a group of you out there that says, hey, we really support what you're doing, we want more of it, this is one surefire way to get us to open up more of our schedule to produce even more content. And plus, if you're a Patreon supporter, you get access to exclusive content separate from what we put out here for free on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube every week as well. So check us out. Check us out at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. So every year, 2 weeks before Selection Sunday, I put out my own bracketology. We were going to do it on our episode last week, but we just had so much breaking news, we put it off for this week's episode. But I can assure you, what you're about to see is the same bracketology I submitted for last week's episode. And if you don't believe me, go back and listen. I also do with a friend of mine, John Miller, who runs HawkeyeNation.com. Each week we do a separate podcast covering the Big Ten called Bigger 10, which you can subscribe to on iTunes, Stitcher, et al. And our podcast last week was my 2 weeks in advance bracketology, and you go and listen to that, and you're going to see it's the exact same bracketology I'm going to share with you. Now, why do I do it 2 weeks in advance? Because none of the conference tournament games have been played yet. So no one's clinched or lost an an automatic berth yet. And I do this every year, one, because I think it's harder. Listen, I love Jerry Palm. I used to talk to him all the time when I did Sports Talk Radio. I'm sure Joe Lunardi's a great guy. But, I don't know how hard it is to do an accurate bracket. I mean, every year we hear Joe Lunardi got every team right, or he only missed one team. Well, you know what? If you follow the sport closely and you already know who all the automatic bids are, and so therefore you've only got to figure out who the 38 at-large teams are, and probably 35 of those spots are definitely spoken for, and you're updating your bracket up until 5 minutes before the committee comes out with one, I got to think a lot of you watching us right now could come up with a bracket 5 minutes before the official one came out with all of that information already known, and you could have a streak where you've gotten almost every team right too. I mean, how hard is that if you're just, fundamentally informed? What's much harder is to try and pick the correct 68 teams 2 weeks before the brackets are unveiled and any postseason games are played. So without further ado, here's my attempt And we'll come back next week and we'll see how many of these teams I got right. Let's begin. This is my bracket. Let's start in the East. I have Duke as the number 1 seed, taking on Penn out of the Ivy League. UCLA, because I project that they will win the Pac-12 tournament. UCLA and Texas A&M in the 8-9 game. I still think Rhode Island will get in. They have suffered a little bit since I put this bracket together, so there's no way they would be a 5 seed. And Texas Tech against the Catamounts of Vermont there in the 4 versus 13. Elsewhere at the bottom half of the East bracket, I have Gonzaga as a 6 against NC State, Missouri. I think that was my play-in game. Cincinnati and Bucknell, Miami of Florida, and Oklahoma, who has been really struggling in the second half of the season. And Purdue, a number 2 seed against 15th seeded Canisius. That's a team I'm going to get wrong. Iona ended up winning that game instead of Canisius. So that's how I have the East bracket. Let's go now to the South. Virginia, number 1 seed. I think they'll be the number 1 overall seed in the tournament against Arkansas Pine Bluff. Arizona State, remember, Arizona State was number 5 in the nation in December. But they are really scuffling here down the stretch against 9th seeded Seton Hall. Kentucky as a 5 seed against Houston/Syracuse. That's one of my other play-in games in Dayton. And Ohio State, the number 4 seed. This is another automatic team I got wrong. East Tennessee State actually lost last night. They had 2 key injuries in a tie game and ended up losing to UNC Greensboro in the Ohio Valley. Nevada, the 6 seed against Middle Tennessee, the 11. So a couple of mid-majors going up against each other in the opening round there. Tennessee, the 3rd seed. This is another automatic berth I got wrong. Florida Gulf Coast lost by 30 points, guys, on its own floor in its conference tournament final. That's not a good look. Florida State, a 7th seed against 10th seeded St. Bonaventure. And I have Xavier, who many people are projecting as a number 1 when it's all said and done, as the 2 seed against Stephen F. Austin, whose conference tournament is still to be played. Now in the West region, number 1 seed I have is Villanova. Yes, I know they did not win the Big East, but they've got a stronger overall profile to Xavier, and they swept Xavier as well. Louisville as an 8 seed, Kansas State as a 9. A lot of people think Louisville may be one of the last 4 out now after they found a way to lose to Virginia. They're up by 5 with 9/10 of a second left and lost. Never seen that before. Don't know that I'll ever see it again. 5th seeded Arizona against 12th seeded Louisiana, and Auburn, who shared the SEC title with Tennessee, the 4 seed there against Idaho, who I project to win the Big Sky Conference. The bottom half of the West bracket, Creighton is a 6 versus 11th seeded Boise State. North Carolina as a 3 against Charleston as a 14. St. Mary's, who I thought would win the West Coast Conference, lost last night in the semis to BYU. Some people think, even though they've been ranked all year long, they may be in danger of not getting a bid. I've got them against Alabama, the 10. And West Virginia, I think, is going to win the Big 12 tournament this weekend. I've got them as number 2 seed against Wright State, who is playing for the Horizon League title tonight, in fact, against a Cleveland State team that has 22 losses. And now to the Midwest bracket. This is how I projected that bracket 2 weeks ago. Kansas, the 16, or the number 1 versus Winthrop as a 16. Arkansas, USC in the 8-9. Michigan, I did not think would win the Big Ten tournament, so there's no way Michigan will be a 5 seed now. Michigan's floor is a 4. I think they're likely a 3. But I've got in this bracket Michigan 5-12 versus New Mexico State, and Clemson versus the champion of the Missouri Valley Conference, Loyola of Chicago. Florida against Toledo. I've got them winning the MAC. Wichita State against South Dakota State. TCU against Butler. And Michigan State against Murray State, which did win its conference tournament and already has clinched an automatic berth to the NCAA. So here's what we're going to do next week, because we'll have a full breakdown of the official bracket on next week's episode. Last year, I finished in the top 1 percentile on ESPN.com in my bracket, correctly predicting North Carolina to beat Gonzaga for the national championship. So I'll give my own pointers for filling out your bracket when next week's episode airs. And then we'll also go back and see how many of the 68 teams did I correctly call. Several of them on the automatic berths. I think I added them up. I think I'm 3-3 so far on teams winning automatic berths. So we'll find out, and you can decide. You know, typically I can get about 75% of the teams right. To me, it's more impressive getting 70 or 75% of the teams right 2 weeks before the bracket comes out than getting 98% of the teams right 5 minutes before the bracket comes out when you already know 90% of the information. But we'll see a week from now how many of these I end up getting correct. All right, Steve Deace here with a rather odd Facebook Live. I've got a bet that I need to pay up on. And I've been a long-time member. A lot of you know I'm a huge Michigan fan. I've been a long-time member to a Michigan website, Gold Blue Wolverine, over on the Scout.com network. And in the middle of the season, when our basketball team was off to a disappointing start, and we'd had a disappointing year 2 years ago, a disappointing year last year, now we're looking at a disappointing year 3 years in a row. I went on there and said, hey, you know what, man, I think it's time for a coaching change. I don't think this team is going anywhere. And one of the readers over there challenged me and said, hey, why don't you wait until the season is over, you know, before, you know, dropping the hammer? You never know. Maybe this team will go on a miracle run. Maybe they'll make the Sweet 16 or something. And I'm like, dude, there's zero chance, negative integer chance this team is making the Sweet 16. In fact, I'm so confident that's not going to happen that if it does, I will take a pie in the face on Facebook Live. Well, lo and behold, only minutes after Michigan upset Louisville in the second round of the NCAA tournament to make the Sweet 16, this gentleman came back to remind me of my pledge, which I had forcibly forgotten. However, the dude code must be honored. I vowed that I would take my comeuppance if this happened. So I will indeed take it, and since this is my beloved favorite team, this is the greatest comeuppance I've ever received, all right? And in fact, just because this is literally one of the dumbest things I have ever said in a public setting, and that's a long and undistinguished list, I'm actually going to take 2 pies in the face, just because I'm going to add on an additional stupid tax for just how dumb John Beilein and the Michigan Wolverines proved that I am. All right, so first up, my son Noah. All right, so Noah.
Somebody says that they wish they were Noah right now.
I bet that is a long and undistinguished line of people who would like to do this. All right, so Noah, you get first dibs here. Make sure we get it over the table so it doesn't get on the floor. All right, so you get first dibs at the old man. Okay, come closer, dude. Got to come closer. All right?
Remember what I said.
First dibs. All right, ready? We're gonna take this in the face. On your mark, go. Oh, it's really cold. That's really cold whipped cream. Oh, but it tastes organic, right? You say you got this at Whole Foods, hey? Where the whipped cream is about $15 a tub, right? Okay.
Exactly.
All right, so Zoe, come on over. I don't think I can open my eyes. All right, so round 2. I'm going to pay the stupid tax here for my fan disloyalty. All right, so just on your mark. Are you ready, Zoe?
Yeah.
All right, on your mark. This looks ridiculous.
Get the other side, Zoe.
Get set, go. Oh, my God.
I don't know if you got enough whipped cream in his face on that one,
goodness.
Zoe.
Oh. Wanted to go back and relive that moment because I was reminded of it when Old Takes Exposed. If you're not following Freezing Cold Takes on Twitter, you're missing out. One of the best sports Twitter follows out there. They're at Old Takes Exposed, and it's basically this guy that just goes around following pundits in various lines of work and just saves a bunch of their stuff when they make radical predictions so that he can point out later on, hey, when they don't come true, you're morons, right? And so he pointed out that I was saying about a year ago that I think Michigan's program has run its course with John Beilein and that this was one of the all-time worst takes he'd ever seen. And he's right. In my line of work, I've given a lot of bad takes and been paid for them. That one I was not paid for, and it is the worst take I've given in my career. So as the Michigan Wolverines, again, made a fool out of me, I wanted to go back and relive that memory as we bring in our good friend Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor. It's good to see you, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing great, Steve. And, if it makes you feel any better, I've taken a pie to the face before. Now, not in the same vein as you did for being so incredibly wrong. Although if they were giving pies in the face for being wrong, I'd probably have had 100 lined up or so in my face already. But we did something for a Whip Cancer Initiative a couple of years back, and Brendan Morrison, great Michigan hockey player, and I stood in the parking lot and just took pie after pie after pie in the face. And Had a lot of fun doing it, and it sounds like, I didn't see the video, but it sounds like maybe there was some good whipped cream. They used like a composite type thing that you couldn't actually eat. So when I had to got it, I didn't want to get any in my mouth at that point.
Yeah, it was actually pretty tasty. You know, I'm a big whipped cream guy, but that's not important now. What is important is the Wolverines do it again at Madison Square Garden, one of the biggest stages in the sport. Record ratings for the Big Ten Network. Sellout crowds at a Big Ten tournament session for the first time in, I think it was 2014, so 4 years now. And they go 4 days in a row, 4 wins in 4 games. They did it again, Michael. Were you surprised?
You know, I think any of us that have been following this team this year, when we've seen how well they've played defensively, when we see the energy and the attitude that they bring to the court, whether it's Xavier Simpson or Mo Wagner or Muhammad Ali Abdul-Rahman, for us to say surprised, I don't think that's fair. At the same time, I didn't expect it to happen because of the fact that they did have to play 4 games in 4 days, and that they were going to have to go through Nebraska that had their number earlier in the year. They're going to go through a Michigan State team that was licking their chops, supposedly licking their chops anyway, to get another piece of Michigan after losing to the Wolverines in the Breslin Center. And then they were going to have to play Purdue, who they lost to twice, if they made it all the way there. And so that was just such a tall task that I didn't think they were going to win it because it was just going to be too much to ask of them. But give them a lot of credit. Give John Beilein a lot of credit. They played some of the best basketball they've played all year, especially in those last 2 games against Michigan State and Purdue. Beat both the teams by double digits, or at least were up by double digits late against Purdue. Really impressive performance. I honestly think, Steve, and I don't know about you, but I think this was a better performance than we saw a year ago. Last year was all about Derek Walton putting the team on their back and carrying them. This was all about 8, 9, really 9 guys, because there's 4 guys in the rotation off the bench. 9 guys, and some of the bench players too, because of the energy that they bring, and coaches. It was an entire team effort to dismantle the rest of the Big Ten this year.
I'm glad that you went there, because right before the Big Ten tournament started, Michael, I went back and watched all of our games in 2017 in Washington, D.C. I watched all 4 of them. And, you see this with the naked eye, but Dan Dockich pointed this out when he called our quarterfinal win over Purdue on Friday. And he said, I've called Michigan games all year long, and here's what I can tell you. You can tell in the first 10 seconds of the shot clock usually whether they're going to score or not based on the movement they have on offense. And what you saw with last year's team is, even with that great run at the end, when they cranked up the defense, on the offensive end of the floor, it was pretty much, if we didn't get motion in the opening few seconds of the shot clock, then we were going to give the ball to Derek Walton with about 8 on the shot clock, and he was going to have to pull something, a rabbit out of the hat, right? One of the things that I think's gone underrated about this year's team and why the defense is so improved is we can put so many scorers and shot makers on the court. We've talked about this before, you and I have, that whatever lineup combination John Beilein uses, he's always got at least 3 guys that can get their own offense on the floor at any point in time. And so when you watch this year's team in the Big Ten tournament, what you would often see is we would wait until about 10 seconds on the shot clock to run our sets, because we knew most of the time we were still going to be able to get a good look with the shot makers we had on the court. And I think that really helps us to sell out defensively on the other end, Michael, because we know we're going to get a 10 to 15 second blow on the offensive side because we know we can still get a good look. Last year's team could not say that, Derek Walton aside.
No, I mean, you're spot on there, Stephen. When you look at it, there was very little hero ball played in the 4 games of the Big Ten tournament. In fact, the probably the biggest amount of hero ball occurred in that Purdue game late at the end of the game when they're trying to ice the clock, and you had Jordan Poole hold it for a one-on-one situation, Charles Matthews hold it for a one-on-one situation. Which was funny. You're right. When they get to the 15-second mark in the shot clock, or closer to the 10-second mark in the shot clock, they're running their set, and they're just trying to find the open guy, because whether it's Duncan Robinson from the outside, or Jordan Poole, or Muhammad Ali Abdul-Rahman, or Xavier Simpson on some of his drives to the basket, they've got man after man after man. You're right. They've got so many different scorers. And then you add in someone like John Teskey, who had a terrific performance on Sunday in the Big Ten Tournament Championship game that was unexpected. So there's just so much that they can do, so much versatility, so many different guys that can score. That's why I think this team is poised for a bigger run in the NCAA tournament than last year's team, because they're not relying on one guy or two guys. Last year was really Derek Walton and Moritz Wagner. And if those guys didn't have a great game, Michigan wasn't going to win. Well, we saw Michigan have a brutal half from Moritz Wagner twice in this tournament. He came back and had a better second half against Michigan State and against Purdue. But we really saw that it didn't matter if you took one guy away. Jordan Poole could not shoot the ball at all in the Big Ten tournament, and that didn't hurt Michigan. Duncan Robinson didn't hit a three-pointer in the Big Ten tournament championship, and that didn't hurt Michigan. Yeah, you'd love to have their contributions, but they've got so many different weapons right now that you can have one or two guys have an off night, and you can still find a way to win. We couldn't say that a year ago.
Do you think Teskey posterizing Isaac Haas at the end of that game, was that sort of the moment, the one shining moment shot that really, I think, spoke to what this team and this program has become, to see the development of a young man like that who maybe a year ago you wondered, is he ever going to play any meaningful minutes at Michigan at all? A month ago you were like, I'd like to see him try to actually dunk the ball more than these cute little layups that seem to get blocked. And there he is, raining down hellfire on the most intimidating physical presence in the entire Big Ten Conference all year long. I thought that was sort of the one shining moment of Michigan's season right there.
Yeah, I really agree with you. Everybody keeps on saying the peskiest, Teskey is pesky and the whole thing. And, it was such an unexpected contribution, but that's really what this team has been about all year. It's been about the unexpected contributions. It's been about Xavier Simpson maximizing his potential. It's been about Muhammad Ali Abdul-Rahman putting it all together to leave a great legacy as a senior. It's about Moritz Wagner becoming a complete player. It's about Duncan Robinson going from the worst defender in the last, 10 years or so to one of the, better defenders for Michigan. Everybody has taken a big step forward and become a key player for Michigan, and that's this team is strong 1 through 9. It's not about being strong 1 through 3. It's strong 1 through 9. And because of what we just saw there with John Teskey, he comes in for Wagner, but he's probably the number 7, number 8 guy on this team, and he had that great performance. And so that just epitomizes what this Michigan basketball team is all about this year.
Michael, let's talk about John Beilein for a second, because he's the classic old school coach, but there's a hipness to the fact that he's old school and that he embraces it and he owns it rather than that it's awkward. Yet, for being an old school coach, the way he's evolved, from the 1-3-1 zone defense to a man-to-man defense to sort of the tenacious old school Duke style of defense. It was ironic to watch Michigan State twice slap the floor Duke style against us, and then we scored immediately both possessions. Yeah. Okay, so he's evolved on that front. I heard him admit to the Big Ten Network crew after the game against Purdue that the number one improvement he made on defense was he had to recognize I'm not good at coaching it, and to bring in guys who could essentially sit next to me and be my defensive coordinator so I could see the whole team and focus on my specialty on offense. When we got Trey Burke, he adjusted his approach from that sort of modified Princeton offense to high ball screen, 1-4 sets, take advantage, have more of a pro-style game with a pro point guard and Trey Burke. And now you've sort of watched him evolve his system again to take advantage of Mo Wagner's sort of Dirk Nowitzki type of skill set. For being an old school guy, we have seen this guy reinvent himself several times in the last 10 years as our coach.
The best coaches in whatever sport you're talking about, football, basketball, hockey, baseball, they all do it. Look at how many baseball coaches now out there are using sabermetrics that weren't in the past. Look at football coaches, Nick Saban, who was such a classic, hard, old school, going to run the pro-style offense, is now running spread elements with it. I remember there's two conversations that stand out to me. One is with Lloyd Carr back in the day, and Lloyd was talking about, this was the mid 2000s, and he was saying how, the difference between when, the hard part about competing now is that you only have 85 scholarships. We used to have 110. And I'm like, Lloyd, it's been 25 years since you've had 110. Let's not, you got to move on with the times. You've got to adapt. And someone like Pete Carroll was one of the very first coaches in college football that said, I'm going to start recruiting these 5-stars and playing them as true freshmen because they have a chance with their high skill to make an impact, and I'm not going to get 4 years out of them anyway, so I'm going to use them right away. So a lot of coaches along the way have evolved. And, we had Mel Pearson on our show on Tuesday, and I asked him about this because there's the video of John Beilein dancing after the game with Jordan Poole. There's the video of John Beilein from a year ago with a super soaker. And as much as, yeah, you're right, the on-court adjustments that he's made, handing things off more to his assistant coaches, I think what's really been the biggest evolution in John Beilein is just how he's related to these players, because this is something that Mel and I talked about is every year John Beilein's 65 years old and Mel Pearson is in his upper 50s. And every single year they get 1 year older, but it happens with the players. Those guys move on. Those players stay the same age. They're 18 to 22 year after year after year. They're not becoming 22 to 23 to 24 to 25 to 26. And so if you're a coach and you're getting older, but your players are staying the same age, you got to find a way to, like, how do I relate to these guys? Like, what's going on? And I love Red Berenson, and I'm always going to be a Red Berenson fan. But Red Berenson, didn't, when I asked him, last year, even about Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, he kind of looked at me like, I'm not doing any of that stuff. That stuff is for the kids. It's stupid. Well, it's not the direct link between success of this season for the Michigan hockey team. But Mel Pearson is a guy that's on Twitter, that's on Facebook, that is, learning some of the songs, hanging out with some of his guys to get to know them a little better. He was telling a story about playing a video game that all of his players love to play, and how they'll spend hours at night playing this video game. And so he was trying to learn what it's all about. That's what coaches have to do. The eras are changing, the players are changing, but they're staying the same age, and you're getting older. And so you've got to find a way to relate to them. And I think that's what John Beilein, I'm really impressed, is that he's changed his offense, he's changed his defense, but he's really kind of learned how to be more of a player's coach. And guys, like, you don't hear anybody. How many times, Steve, have you heard someone really, really praise and talk about how much fun it is to play for Coach Izzo? How they just love playing for Coach Izzo because he's such a good guy, and there's a tough love there, but I don't know if they love playing for him as much as they respect playing for him. With John Beilein, these guys love playing for him. And when you have a team, especially a smaller group that's tight-knit, that has great camaraderie, you can go so far because of that chemistry and that love and that attitude that you have for your coaches and for your teammates.
Yeah, I'm a little bit older than you, but both of us have been Michigan basketball fans our entire lives. And in some respects, this season reminds me of 1986. So I'm dating myself a little bit, but Michigan lost only 4 games that year, was the clear Big Ten champion. But we lost a tougher Michigan State team twice. I can still remember Scott Skiles dropping "Shoot It, Fat Boy" on Antoine Joubert, watching that game on the old Pass cable channel growing up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, if you remember back in those days. And it's sort of like that now, where we're the tougher team. They were the league champ. They've only lost 4 games, but 2 of them were to us. And when we played them head-to-head, we were clearly the tougher team. And I think a lot of that, which is incredulous to say from where we started the year, a lot of that comes down to Xavier Simpson. And again, when I went back and watched last year's Big Ten tournament, we were basically a 6-man rotation. Xavier Simpson was a shell of what we see now, coming off the bench to spell Derek Walton. And, what we're getting out of John Teske compared to what we're getting from Mark Donnell, it's just not even close in terms of the physical presence, etc. There's no way we could have won a Big Ten tournament game against anybody with Donnell playing 28 minutes the way we did against Iowa in overtime with Teske the other night. And this team, though, to watch Xavier Simpson develop, is this the most you've ever seen one player? I can't think of another guy in a Michigan basketball uniform. And I think probably the first year I've ever really can remember, the 84 team with Tim McCormick that won the NIT. So we're going back over 30 years now since I was a little kid. I cannot remember one player from where he was at the start of the year, where Eli Brooks, who is your starting point guard, he can't see the court right now. And not only is Xavier Simpson owning that position, but this is his team. It has taken on his persona. I mean, Grant Hill is comparing him to Bobby Hurley while he's calling these games for CBS the other day. You ever seen anything like this, Michael?
No, and as you were talking about that, I was trying to rack my brain for players that have made that big of a jump from 1 year within the scope of 1 year, and I couldn't think of it. I could think of a couple players that I think have really evolved over the course of their careers. Muhammad Ali and Abdul Rahman's one of them, but nobody to essentially, you came in the year as, from a lot of people had Xavier Simpson third on their depth chart at point guard. hoping that John Simmons was the answer, thinking that Eli Brooks coming in could be the number 2, and Xavier, after a pretty nondescript freshman season, would just kind of fade to the background. And now, I mean, how many times would you see his face and just that look of sheer, like, I've got this, and moxie and swagger that he had on the look on his face over the weekend. And it was incredible. There is a toughness. That's, I think, maybe the thing that most Michigan fans are really excited about, Steve, and I'm sure you are too, is the toughness of this group. Because for all those years that Izzo's teams used to bully Michigan around, they had, Antonio Smith and Mo Pete, and years after that, even Adrian Payne, and guys that would just kind of push Michigan's bigs around. And that doesn't happen anymore because of Moritz Wagner. It doesn't happen anymore because of Xavier Simpson. It doesn't happen anymore because of Muhammad Ali Abdul-Rahman. It just doesn't happen because Michigan is a mentally and a physically tough team. It's really exciting to watch, and it gives you great hope for the future. And it gives you great hope that, Wagner and Simpson, they're going to be able to carry that over to year after year after year. And I tell you what, the one common theme, if you look at this team, is besides Jordan Poole, even Isaiah Livers. Isaiah Livers is a 4-star, and he was the state of Michigan Mr. Basketball a year ago. But if you were to ask most experts would say that he wasn't the best player in the state. Most people that went to Michigan State obviously would say that, it's probably the 3rd or 4th best, and he just put together nice stats. He played on a nice team, and that's why he won. So Isaiah Livers comes in his freshman year as Mr. Basketball and yet has a chip on his shoulder. Xavier Simpson has a chip on his shoulder because he was all the Cassius Winston's talk about how everybody really wanted Cassius Winston, and Xavier Simpson was the plucky, let's just go get him let's just get him because we don't want to wait on Cassius Winston. He's got a chip on his shoulder. Moritz Wagner has a chip on his shoulder. Muhammad Ali Abdul-Rahman was a 2-star that when you look at his offer list, you would laugh at the schools that were offering him because they sound like all academic schools on the East Coast that you didn't even know they had basketball programs. And he's got a chip. So everybody in this team has a chip on their shoulder. And it's this inverse of what this rivalry has always been about. It's always been about Michigan State, and now especially in football, being able to play with that motivation of everybody's been disrespecting us and we got to go out there and take it away from you. And now Michigan basketball has it, and it's awesome to see them play with that type of attitude. And I just hope that football can get back to that point at some point.
I look at Xavier Simpson's old man game with the high glass lay-ins and the scoop shots and the funky angles and that demeanor, that steely demeanor. It reminds me of when we were kids. It reminds me of Joe Dumars. Now, he's not as big as Dumars was, but that was Joe Dumars' game. That sort of steely resolve, those high-angle shots, those looping scoop shots. That was kind of his game, and I see a lot of that in Xavier Simpson. Final question, Michael. You go back and you look at the big picture of this now, and the Michigan program, when Tractor Trailer, his SUV, had that rollover with Mateen Cleaves on his recruiting visit on that wintry highway, and that really introduced the world to the name Ed Martin. And what would come in the next few months is, Brian Ellerby would emulate Steve Fisher's success to some degree as an interim coach and lead Michigan to the first Big Ten tournament title. But shortly thereafter would come essentially a 10-year winner of Michigan basketball. And the Michigan program, the administration afterwards, they were like, hey, they looked at what Duke was doing with mostly 3- and 4-year players at an elite academic school, and that they could win at a big-time level in basketball without the seedy underbelly of college basketball tainting it, and wondered, why can't we do that at Michigan? And they've tried several combinations. They even chased Rick Pitino when he was coming back to college basketball. It seems as if now, in the last 7 or 8 years, Rick Pitino, Freudian slip there, Mike Krzyzewski got tired of losing to the likes of Rick Pitino and John Calipari and began playing the one-and-done agent game and sort of vacated that Duke mentality, that brand they had of demographically diverse teams that were skilled, were smart, but they were also nasty. Bobby Hurley and Christian Laettner talked more junk than any college basketball players I can remember, even more than the Fab Five. I mean, Laettner even stepped on guys' throats literally during basketball games in order to send messages. So they had this sort of squeaky clean image, but they also played with an edge. I look at our team now, going back to when that Illinois, I don't remember who that Illinois player was, but I think we need to send him a cookie bouquet. The one who called us the white collar team.
White collar, yeah.
Ever since that moment, a switch has come on, And we've sort of become this sort of teams that we watch Duke with Ala Abdelnaby and Greg Kubek and Hurley, Leitner and Mark Allery and Jay Billis and these guys. Michigan has sort of become the program that Duke used to be, and in some strange ways has sort of fulfilled what the Michigan administration sought to do after the Ed Martin saga, and it just took a long time to get there. But that's sort of our brand now. We have smart guys. We have a demographically diverse team, but these are not soft guys. They will talk smack. They have an edge. They are nasty. They remind me of the Duke teams I watched growing up as a kid.
Well, I certainly think, Steve, that we are in this golden era of Michigan basketball, and I hope that this golden era is not just something that's a fleeting, 2 or 3 years, but it's something that John Beilein has reestablished Michigan as the program that everybody wants to aspire to be like. And I say that because he's done it the right way, and he's winning at a very high level. And if you could get a national championship before he retires, which hopefully is not for another 6, 8, 10 years. I think you'd have the makings of a program that could sustain for 30 years, like Duke has, like North Carolina has. I love it, and I tell you what, if you were to look back and as you were talking, I was thinking about this. If you take the last 5 years of college basketball, I would throw Duke up there. I'd throw North Carolina. I'd throw Villanova. I'd put Kansas and Michigan State. And then, honestly, after that, Steve, what other program has had the consistent 5-year run that Michigan has had? Mm-hmm. And that even keeps in mind with the 2 years there where Karis LeVert was banged up and Michigan struggled a little bit. I mean, Michigan has 2 Big Ten tournament titles, 3 Sweet 16 bursts in the last 5 years. They've been to a Final Four, a national championship, actually. They've been to an Elite Eight. Kentucky, for as good as Kentucky was supposed to be with all the one-and-dones, they've not consistently been the best program in the SEC. They have not been a Final Four team year in, year out.
We won the regular season in 2014 by 3 games, too. Remember that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so it's really incredible, Steve, what Michigan basketball has been these last couple of years, and it's really incredible where they're going with their recruiting class coming in. This is the most exciting time for Michigan basketball fans since the era of the Fab Five. But, the interesting thing about the era of the Fab Five was certainly Michigan, you mentioned 86, and Michigan won a national championship in 1989. But there were some disappointing teams before the 89, and there were some disappointing teams after the Fab Five left that they really struggled to ever come close to what those days were like. And I think you're looking at right now, if you take the last 5 years, the next 5 years, I think that 10-year stretch under John Beilein, we're going to look back and say that it is probably the best 10-year stretch of Michigan basketball, maybe in the history of the program.
Michael Spath from WTKA in Ann Arbor. Good to see you, brother. We'll have brackets, the real ones, the big ones, to break down next week. We'll talk to you then. Thanks, man.
Can't wait. Thanks a lot, Steve.
More Michigan podcast in a moment. This week's Twitter results, we asked you, has Michigan become a basketball school? I'm surprised. 56% of you said yes. So there's that. This week's question of the week, as we close it out on this week's episode of Michigan Podcast, Mike asks, what's it going to take to start beating Sparty again in football, too? Because Michigan's won 3 in a row against Michigan State in basketball, all 3 wins by double digits. What's basketball done? They've gotten physically tougher. And look at the point guard play, Derek Walton and Xavier Simpson. Those are your quarterbacks. And we've had the better point guard and therefore the better quarterback. Same thing here. Offensive line play, get more physical, better quarterback play. Same prescription in football that we've seen in basketball. What's worked in beating Sparty in basketball will also work if we can manage to do it in football. Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. I want to thank our friends at Detroit Sports Podcast who help us each week get the word out about what we do here. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter. We keep you updated all week long with our thoughts at Michigan Podcast on Twitter. Thanks to all of our supporters on Patreon as well. Next week, we break it all down. The madness begins. Until then, go Blue.